Alien blood dripped onto the forest undergrowth, vivid blue fluid splattering onto dark leaves. A wounded princess dying alone on a savage alien world. Her Ocampa royal shuttle hurtled through space, a panicked distress signal blaring on all frequencies into the void. Engines damaged by a vicious attack, the pilot fought the dead controls. The interior lights flickered, consoles sparked, alarms blared. Princess Wren, only heir to the Ocampa throne, grasped her harness, terrified as the ship tumbled end over end. A massive explosion shook the hull. The pilot slammed into the controls, his neck snapping like a twig. Wren looked at the corpse in horror, realizing she was now alone. Injured and scared, she saw a small blue-green orb through the cracked forward displays, a habitable planet called Earth. She had to land but had no idea how to fly. The alarms increased in intensity as the ground approached. She activated the emergency stealth field, a protective bubble absorbing the ship in invisibility. It would have to do. Wren braced for impact as flaming chunks of the shuttle flew off, trees rushing up at incredible speed. She blacked out as the ship slammed into a forest, ploughing a charred furrow into the dirt. She woke bloody and dazed, the shuttle a burning patchwork of twisted metal around her. Wren checked the flickering displays. The stealth field still held. At least the primitives of this world would not see her shame and pain. She had to find help, had to survive alone on this alien planet filled with a savage species called humans. Her people would not last long without her, but she had to stay hidden. Primitive creatures could never be allowed to learn of her people's existence. Wren staggered into the woods, a trail of blue blood making an easy path for her enemies to follow. The blood touched a hidden sensor in the burning wreckage. A small light started to flash, broadcasting to the stars. David Ross swatted aside a branch, his skin stained with sweat. The 21-year-old's boots thudded against the muddy earth, his breaths heavy in his ears. As an avid hiker, David reveled in exploring the wilderness surrounding his college town. Little did he know his latest adventure would lead him to an extraordinary encounter. A flash of blue caught his eye. David froze. Vivid azure liquid pooled on the forest floor, trailing off into the dense undergrowth. His curiosity piqued, David followed the strange blood spatters, pushing deeper into the trees. The blood formed a clear path, as if deliberately left to be found. As he pushed through a tangle of bushes, David froze. There, collapsed against a tree trunk, was a cloaked figure. The hood obscured their features, but the blood staining their clothes was unmistakable. David rushed forward, his shock quickly replaced by concern. "Hey, are you all right?" He crouched beside the figure. The figure stirred, their hood slipping to reveal decidedly inhuman features. Ridges adorned high cheekbones, and pointed ears peeked through disheveled hair. David recoiled, his heart hammering. But the figure's pained cry snapped him out of his fear. Alien or not, they were hurt and needed help. "It's okay, I won't hurt you," David said softly, holding up his hands. The figure eyed him warily, their body tense. "My name's David. I want to help." "I cannot," the figure rasped, their voice distinctly feminine. "No one can know." David inched closer, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "Know what? That you're not human?" He tried for a reassuring smile. "Your secret's safe with me, I promise." The alien woman hesitated, her eyes searching his. Pain and desperation warred in her gaze. Finally, she gave a small nod. David wasted no time, shrugging off his backpack and rummaging for his first aid kit. He cleaned and bandaged her wounds with practiced efficiency, his hands steady despite the extraordinary situation. "I'm Wren," the woman said quietly, accepting the water bottle David offered. "I am not from this planet." David chuckled. "Yeah, I figured that much." He sobered. "Are you in trouble? Is someone after you?" Wren's gaze darted to the sky, fear clouding her features. "I am hunted. My presence here must remain secret. If I am discovered, it could endanger your world." David frowned. The gravity in her voice told him this was no prank or delusion. "Okay, we'll keep you hidden." He helped her to her feet, supporting her weight. "I know a place deep in the woods, an old ranger station. No one goes there anymore. You'll be safe." Wren leaned heavily against him, her steps unsteady. David shouldered both their packs, his mind racing. What had he gotten himself into? But one glance at Wren's exhausted, vulnerable face steeled his resolve. He'd promised to help, and he intended to keep that promise. As they hiked deeper into the wilderness, David using his compass and outdoor skills to navigate, neither noticed the sleek silver ship descending from the clouds. It landed silently in a clearing, its hull shimmering with advanced cloaking technology. The hatch opened, and a dozen heavily armed figures emerged. They wore black combat gear, their faces obscured by dark helmets. The leader held up a glowing device, the screen pulsing with a blinking red dot. "The princess's blood signal is strong," the leader said, his voice distorted by his helmet. "She is close. Find her and eliminate any obstacles." The mercenaries spread out, their weapons at the ready. They moved with ruthless efficiency, cutting a path of destruction through the tranquil forest. Birds scattered from the treetops, and small animals fled in terror. The hunt was on, and they would not stop until they had their prize. David supported Wren as they hiked deeper into the woods, her alien blood leaving a shimmering trail behind them. Wren stumbled, her strength fading. "I need to rest," Wren gasped. David scanned the trees, spotting a small cabin nestled in a hidden valley. "There, we can hide out in that cabin." David half-carried Wren inside the musty cabin. Wren collapsed onto a dusty cot, while David barricaded the door and windows. As Wren slept, David searched the cabin. He found some old cans of beans and a few dusty tools, but in the back of a closet, he discovered a real treasure, an ancient shortwave radio. "I can get this working," David said, grabbing a screwdriver. As a mechanical engineering student, he'd always had a knack for fixing things. After an hour of tinkering, he powered on the radio. It crackled to life. "I used to have skills," Wren said, now awake and watching him work. "Your people are not as primitive as I was led to believe." David chuckled. "Gee, thanks, I think." He sat down beside her. "What's your story, Wren? I mean, you don't have to tell me if you don't want to, but—" Wren sighed. "My people, the Ocampa, are a peaceful race, but there is a radical faction led by a warlord named Chiron. He believes the Ocampa are superior and should rule the galaxy. My family has opposed his vision for generations, and now—" "He wants you dead," David finished, "because you're the heir." Wren nodded. "Those mercenaries serve Chiron. If they capture me, he will seize the throne and wage a war of conquest." David clenched his fists. "Like hell he will. I won't let that happen." "You would help me? Defy your own world's laws to aid an alien?" "I'm not going to sit back and let innocent people die, human or Ocampa. Besides," he smiled at her, "I've never been one for following rules." David turned to the radio, an idea forming. "I might know someone who can help us." He fiddled with the dials until he found the right frequency. "Jace? Jace, you there? It's David." "David?" A gruff voice crackled through the speaker. "Why the hell are you calling me on this fossil?" "I need your help. You're not going to believe this, but—" David explained about finding Wren and the mercenaries hunting her. There was a long pause. "You're right, I don't believe it. An alien princess, David, what have you gotten yourself into?" "Jace, I swear it's true. Can you just look into any unusual activity? Strange ships, weapons, anything like that?" Jace sighed. "Fine, I still have some contacts from my Marine days. I'll see what I can dig up, but David, be careful." "Always am." David signed off and turned to Wren. "Jace is a good guy. He'll come through for us." Over the next few days, David and Wren fortified the cabin, setting traps and alarms. They took turns keeping watch, alert for any sign of the mercenaries. In the quiet moments, they talked about their worlds, their families, their hopes and fears. Despite their differences, a deep bond began to grow between them, a connection born of shared danger and mutual respect. But their peace could not last. One night an alarm tripped. David jolted awake to see a glowing dot on the motion sensor display. The mercenaries had found them. "Ren, we have to move." David shook her awake and grabbed their packs. They burst out of the cabin into the night, just as a plasma bolt sizzled past David's ear. The mercenaries were closing in, their advanced weapons lighting up the dark forest. David and Ren sprinted through the undergrowth, dodging energy blasts. A mercenary lunged from the shadows. David tackled him, slamming his fist into the attacker's faceplate. The mercenary crumpled. Ren cried out. A plasma bolt had grazed her leg. David pulled her to her feet, half dragging her through the trees. They stumbled down a ravine, taking cover behind a boulder. The mercenaries' shouts echoed above them. "We'll never outrun them," Ren panted, her face tight with pain. David gripped her hand. "We have to try. Jace will come through for us. We just need to buy some time." Ren met his gaze, fear and determination warring in her eyes. "David, A plasma bolt struck the boulder, showering them with shards of hot rock. David pulled Ren close, shielding her. He knew their odds of survival were slim, but he also knew he would do whatever it took to protect this brave, amazing woman who had crashed into his life and changed everything. Together, they fled deeper into the wilderness, the fate of two worlds hanging in the balance. David and Ren crashed through the underbrush, their lungs burning with each gasping breath. The mercenaries' shouts grew louder, plasma bolts sizzling through the air around them. Ren stumbled, her injured leg giving out. David caught her, half dragging her forward. "There!" Ren pointed to a narrow crevice in a rock face, hidden by dense foliage. They squeezed into the opening, the damp stones scraping their skin. The passage opened into a small cave, lit by an eerie blue glow. In the center of the cave sat a battered metal pod, its surface etched with alien symbols. Ren let out a soft gasp. An Ocampa escape pod. I thought they were just legends. David ran his hand over the pod's hull, his engineer's mind already whirring. "Can we use it to get you home?" Ren shook her head. "The systems are damaged. It would take weeks to repair, even if we had the parts." David squared his shoulders. "Then we'll find another way." He dug through his pack, pulling out a tangle of wires and circuitry. "I might be able to boost the radio signal. Contact Jace for help." As David worked, stripping wires with his teeth and splicing connections, Ren kept watch at the cave entrance. The mercenaries' voices grew closer, their footsteps crunching through the undergrowth. "David," Ren's voice was tense. "Almost got it." David twisted two wires together and the radio crackled to life. "Jace, come in, it's David." "David." "Thank God." Jace's voice was strained. "Listen, I found out some shit about those mercenaries. They're not just after the princess. They're planning a full-scale invasion of Earth." David's blood ran cold. "What? Why?" "Resources, slave labor. The usual imperialist bullshit." Jace sounded grim. "David, if they get their hands on the princess, they'll use her as a pretext to attack. You can't let that happen." David looked at Ren, saw the fear in her eyes. "We won't, I promise." He turned back to the pod, his hands flying over the controls. "Jace, I need you to find us a way off this planet. We found an old Ocampa escape pod, but it's in bad shape." "I'll see what I can do, but David, be careful. Those mercs won't stop until they have the princess." The radio went silent. David worked feverishly, rewiring circuits and rerouting power. Ren helped where she could, her slender fingers nimble on the alien controls. A plasma bolt struck the cave entrance, showering them with rock dust. The mercenaries had found them. "How much longer?" Ren asked, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Just a few more minutes." David spliced two final wires and the pod hummed to life. "It's not pretty, but it should get you home." Ren laid a hand on his arm. It will get us home." David swallowed hard. "Ren, Another plasma bolt struck the cave, closer this time. David grabbed a length of metal pipe, his makeshift weapon feeling flimsy in his hands. "Get the pod ready, I'll hold them off." He moved towards the cave entrance, but Ren caught his arm. "David, no, you can't fight them alone." I have to. You're the only one who can stop this invasion. You have to warn your people. David cupped her face in his hands. Ren, please let me do this. Tears glistened in Ren's eyes, but she nodded. Come back to me, she whispered. David kissed her, fierce and desperate. Then he turned and charged out of the cave, a battle cry on his lips. He fought like a man possessed, using the terrain to his advantage. He triggered rock slides, set makeshift traps, lured the mercenaries into blind canyons. All the while he bought Ren the time she needed. A plasma bolt grazed his shoulder, sending him sprawling. David struggled to his feet, his vision blurring. The mercenaries closed in, their weapons trained on his chest. A sudden roar filled the air. The escape pod burst from the cave, Ren at the controls. She fired the pod's thrusters, sending a wave of searing heat towards the mercenaries. They scattered, momentarily distracted. Ren landed the pod beside David, the hatch hissing open. Get in, she shouted. David climbed into the pod, his heart pounding. Ren's hands flew over the controls, preparing for takeoff, but nothing happened. No, no, no! Ren slammed her fist against the console. There's not enough power, the pod can only carry one. David's heart stopped. He knew what he had to do. Ren, you have to go. Warn your people. Stop the invasion. I'll stay behind, buy you some time. No, I won't leave you. Ren gripped his hand, her eyes fierce. You have to. Please, Ren, your people need you. Earth needs you. David swallowed the lump in his throat. I need you to be safe. Tears streamed down Ren's face, but she nodded. I'll come back for you, I swear it. David kissed her one last time, pouring all his love and fear and desperate hope into the embrace. Then he wrenched himself away and climbed out of the pod. Go, he shouted as the mercenaries regrouped and advanced. The pod's engines roared to life. Ren looked at him through the view screen, her hand pressed to the glass. Then the pod blasted into the sky, disappearing into the clouds. David watched it go, his heart breaking. Then he turned to face the mercenaries, a grim smile on his face. All right, you bastards, let's dance. He charged forward, his makeshift weapon raised. He would buy Ren the time she needed, even if it cost him everything. David fought like a man with nothing to lose, his mind focused on a single goal. Protect Ren, protect Earth. The mercenaries fell before him, their superior weapons no match for his desperate fury. But there were too many. A plasma bolt caught him in the leg, sending him to his knees. Another struck his chest, burning through his flesh. David collapsed, his vision dimming. As the mercenaries surrounded him, their weapons trained on his broken body, David's thoughts turned to Ren. He pictured her face, her brilliant smile, her fierce courage. He had done his part. Now it was up to her. With the last of his strength, David raised his head and spat blood at the mercenaries' feet. Do your worst, you fucking cowards! Earth will never be yours! The mercenary leader laughed, a cruel metallic sound. Earth is already ours, boy, and your princess will soon join you in death. White-hot anger surged through David's veins. He lunged forward, his hands closing around the leader's throat. The mercenary struggled, but David held on with a strength born of desperation. A plasma bolt struck David's back, then another. His grip loosened, his vision fading. As he collapsed to the ground, his last thoughts were of Ren. I'm sorry, he whispered. I love you. The world went black and David Ross knew no more. Light years away, Ren sat at the controls of the escape pod, her heart heavy with grief and guilt. She had left David behind, left him to face the mercenaries alone. The rational part of her knew it was the only choice, that David had sacrificed himself so she could save both their worlds. But the part of her that loved him, the part that had come alive in his presence, that part would never forgive herself. I will come back for you, she whispered, a vow and a prayer. I will make this right. She turned her attention to the pod's communications array, her fingers flying over the controls. She had to contact her people, warn them of the coming invasion. She had to gather allies, build a coalition to stand against the mercenaries and their master. But first, she had to convince them that the threat was real, that a primitive species called humans had risked everything to save the Ocampa from their own kind. that a man named David Ross had given his life for a world he would never see. Wren squared her shoulders, her grief hardening into resolve. She would not let David's sacrifice be in vain. She would honor his memory by fighting for the future he had believed in, the future where humans and Ocampa stood together against the darkness. She opened a channel, the pod signal beaming across the stars. "This is Princess Wren of the Ocampa royal family. I have urgent news for my people, news that will change the course of our history. The fate of 2 worlds hangs in the balance, and we must act now to save them both." Wren took a deep breath, preparing herself for the battles to come. She would face the mercenaries, the doubters, the enemies within and without. She would forge alliances, build bridges, do whatever it took to protect her people and the world that had sheltered her. And through it all she would carry David's memory in her heart, a flame that would never die. "I will make this right," she repeated, a promise to the man she loved and the future they had dreamed of together. "I will find a way." David gasped awake, his body racked with phantom pain. Slowly, reality trickled in. He was alive, lying in a hospital bed, his wounds bandaged. He struggled to sit up, his mind reeling with fragmented memories of the battle, of Wren's sacrifice. A nurse rushed to his side, urging him to rest, but David pushed past her, driven by a desperate need to act. He had to warn them. Earth had to prepare. David staggered into the hallway, ignoring the startled looks from hospital staff. He had to find Jace, had to marshal Earth's defenses before it was too late. He stumbled into the street, flagging down a cab. As the city blurred past, David pulled out the battered shortwave radio, his hands shaking as he tuned it to Jace's frequency. "Jace, it's David. The mercenaries, they're coming. We have to—" Static crackled. Then Jace's voice filled the cab. "I know, David. I found proof. Meet me at the Pentagon in 1 hour. Bring everything you have." David leaned back, his heart pounding. This was it, Earth's last chance. An hour later, David stood before a room of stern-faced generals and stone-faced politicians, Jace at his side. He told his story, his voice steady despite the weight of the words. He laid out Jace's evidence, the intercepted transmissions, the satellite images of Ocampa ships massing at the edge of the solar system. Silence fell, heavy with disbelief and fear. Then the questions started, sharp and probing, tearing at the edges of David's story. He weathered them all, his conviction unshakable. Earth had to act, had to unite, or all would be lost. In the end, it was Jace's testimony that turned the tide, his military record and intelligence contacts lending credibility to David's claims. Slowly, grudgingly, the leaders began to listen, to plan. David sagged in his chair, exhaustion crashing over him, but there was no time to rest. Earth had to prepare, had to be ready when the invaders came. In a secret facility deep beneath the Pentagon, David pored over star charts and tactical displays, working with Earth's best minds to devise a defense. Engineers and scientists worked around the clock, reverse engineering Ocampa technology, developing new weapons and shielding. Soldiers trained in new tactics, learning to fight an enemy from the stars. But even as Earth girded for war, David's thoughts turned to Wren. He pictured her in the hands of the mercenaries, imagined the horrors she must be facing. His fists clenched, a silent vow forming in his heart. He would save her, no matter the cost. Light years away, Wren stood before Xanos, her head high despite the chains that bound her. The Ocampa warlord circled her, his eyes cold and calculating. "You could be a queen," he purred, his voice silk and venom. "Rule at my side and your people will be spared." Wren met his gaze unflinching. "I will never betray my people or Earth." Xanos's face twisted with rage, his hand cracking across her cheek. Wren tasted blood, but she did not flinch. She would endure for David, for her people, for the future they had dreamed of. In the long hours of her captivity, Wren listened and observed, gathering scraps of information about Xanos's plans. She learned of the invasion fleet, the devastating weapons they carried. She committed every detail to memory, a precious cargo to be delivered to Earth. if she survived. As the Ocampa ships hurtled towards Earth, David stood on the bridge of Earth's flagship, a hastily retrofitted NASA shuttle. Around him, a ragtag fleet of ships from a dozen nations hung in space, a fragile line of defense against the oncoming storm. David's heart raced as the Ocampa ships came into view, their hulls bristling with weapons. This was it, the moment of truth. Earth's survival hung in the balance. "All ships engage," David barked into the comm, his voice steady with resolve. Space lit up with the fire of 1,000 suns as the battle began. Earth ships darted and weaved, their jury-rigged weapons scoring hits against the Ocampa shields. But the invaders' technology was superior, their firepower overwhelming. One by one, Earth ships fell, blazing like comets as they plummeted into the atmosphere. David gripped the console, his knuckles white. They were losing, Earth's defenses crumbling before the onslaught. He had to do something, had to find a way to turn the tide. A sudden thought seized him, a desperate gambit. The Ocampa flagship, the nerve center of their fleet, if he could take it out, disrupt their command and control. "Jace, take the con," David ordered, already moving towards the shuttle bay. "I'm going in." Jace started to protest, but the look in David's eyes silenced him. He nodded grimly, clasping David's shoulder. "Godspeed, my friend." David boarded a one-man shuttle, his hands flying over the unfamiliar controls. He had one chance, one shot to end this. Failure was not an option. The shuttle darted through the chaos of the battle, dodging debris and energy blasts. The Ocampa flagship loomed ahead, a monstrous silhouette against the stars. David aimed for the hangar bay, his jaw set with determination. The shuttle skidded to a halt inside the flagship, sparks flying from its battered hull. David leaped out, a stolen Ocampa blaster in his hands. Alarms blared as he raced through the corridors, following the schematics Jace had pulled from the Ocampa data networks. He burst onto the bridge, blaster leveled at Xanos' head. The warlord spun, his eyes widening in shock, but it was the figure beside him that made David's heart stop. Ren, her face bruised and her eyes haunted, stood at Xanos' side, a cruel collar around her neck. Xanos smiled, his hand hovering over a control panel. "Surrender or she dies," he said, his voice cold with triumph. David's mind raced, desperately seeking a solution, but there was none. He could not let Ren die, not even for Earth. Slowly, he lowered his blaster. Xanos' smile widened. "Foolish human, you think you can stand against the might of the Ocampa?" His hand came down on the panel and Ren screamed, her body convulsing with agony. David surged forward, his blaster forgotten. He tackled Xanos, his hands closing around the warlord's throat. They grappled, trading blows with brutal force. David fought with the strength of desperation, his every blow fueled by rage and love. But Xanos was strong, his Ocampa physiology granting him an edge. A blow sent David reeling, his vision blurring. Xanos loomed over him, a cruel blade in his hand. David braced himself for the end, his thoughts flying to Ren, to the life they might have had. But the blow never came. Ren, forgotten in the melee, had torn the collar from her neck, her eyes blazing with fury. She leaped at Xanos, a scream of rage tearing from her throat. The blade sank into her chest, a blossom of red staining her tunic. Xanos stared in shock, the blade falling from his nerveless fingers. David surged to his feet, snatching up his fallen blaster. He fired, again and again, until Xanos fell, his body a smoking ruin. David gathered Ren in his arms, tears streaming down his face. She smiled up at him, her hand cupping his cheek. "I love you," she whispered, her voice fading. "Save them, David, save them all." Her eyes fluttered closed, her last breath sighing from her lips. David held her close, his heart shattering in his chest. But there was no time for grief. The battle still raged, Earth's fate hanging in the balance. David laid Ren gently on the deck, his eyes hard with resolve. He turned to the flagship's controls, his hands flying over the panels. With a few keystrokes, he disabled the ship's weapons, sent a pulse of energy surging through the Ocampa fleet. One by one, The ships went dark, their systems crashing under the onslaught. It was over. Earth had won. In the aftermath of the battle, David stood on a hilltop, watching the sun set over a world forever changed. The Ocampa had surrendered, their fleet in ruins, and their leadership shattered. Earth's nations, once divided, had united in the face of a common threat. A new era had begun, a time of rebuilding and reconciliation. The Ocampa and the humans would forge a new alliance, their shared trauma a bridge to understanding. David would be at the forefront of that effort, his experience and his love for Ren a guiding light in the darkness. He reached into his pocket, his fingers closing around a small glowing crystal. Ren's final gift, a piece of her world to carry with him, always. He held it up to the fading light, watching it sparkle in his palm. "I won't let you down, Ren," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll make the future we dreamed of, I promise." He closed his fingers around the crystal, its warmth suffusing his skin. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold. David turned his face to the stars, ready to face the challenges ahead. For Ren, for Earth, for the future. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.